So, Vivek Ramaswamy has seemingly kind of taken up the John Mearsheimer position on Russia and Ukraine. And I think a lot of people don't know this, but John Mearsheimer wants to completely reform our relationship with Russia in order to kind of treat it like Nixon treated China, as a counterbalance. Instead of China being a counterbalance to the Soviet Union, in this case, Russia would be a counterbalance to, would be a counterbalance to China. And in order to do that, he would sell out Ukraine and compromise with Putin on Europe, allow him, basically say, look, you get what you want, we get what we want, make kind of like a deal between empires, and then you work with me against the Chinese. I don't think it would work. I think Vivek Ramaswamy would fall flat on his face for multiple reasons, but let me hold off my criticism. The least I should let the man do is say his piece before I say what I think. So let's listen to what he has to say. During my interview with Ramaswamy, he reiterated his position that he would allow Putin to keep parts of Ukraine, block Ukraine from joining NATO, and even visit Putin in Moscow. The GOP contender added, "Our goal should not be for Putin to lose."
And you've also suggested that Vladimir Putin be allowed to keep parts of Ukraine as part of a way to solve that conflict. What if he wants parts of Poland?
You leave
next?
out the most important part of that deal.
More of Ukraine next.
Aren't
you letting some of these authoritarian leaders off the
hook? What actually advances? Far from it. I think that the Biden administration is so stubbornly attached to the idea of getting Xi Jinping to drop Vladimir Putin. What I think we need to be doing is...
Okay, so he's not going to address Jim Acosta's question whatsoever. Jim Acosta's question was, if we give Putin all these sections of land of Ukraine, what's to stop Putin from saying, wow, we face planted and that was successful. Give us more of Ukraine in a few years after they've licked their wounds and Ukraine's been kept out of strategic alliances that would stop a Russian invasion, like NATO, which has been a proven method to stop Russian invasions. Budapest Memorandum certainly didn't do that, even though that was an an agreement they signed. And his answer to that is, it seems to be like, I don't care. That's not my main focus. He's dodging the question, basically. Or I guess you could say it's a tacit admission that, well, I don't know. It's not really, it is what it is.
Is get Vladimir Putin to drop Xi Jinping. Just like Nixon went to China in that...
it is actually kind of... And the problem is, Ramaswamy's really good with rhetoric, and journalists don't know how to hold down a slimy tech bro, because if there's anything tech bros can do is market themselves. They can't hold him down, but I would want him to be held down on, like, wait, are you telling me that you would be willing? Because he brought up giving up land in Poland. Like, if Putin said we want parts of Poland, would that be up for grabs? Like, how much are you willing to give up to make Putin feel like it's worth it to turn on the Chinese, or quote unquote turn on the Chinese? It's not like they're solid allies. To be like, actually, you know what? This BRIC stuff is a bad idea. And you know what, China? I'm actually going to be selling my oil to the United States. And they shift and they, you know what? I'm going to put sanctions on your tech industry. You would have to give Putin a lot for him to give up that type of strategic hedging. You would have to give him a lot, because it's not like Putin and China are like the closest of allies. In fact, if you see how China went to Saudi Arabia recently, when Putin said that there was no deal to be made in Saudi Arabia with the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians were holding a peace conference there, the Chinese went anyway and said they'd be happy to go to future conferences where the Russians aren't there. They still believe that the Ukrainians have to talk to the Russians, but it seems that the Chinese are taking the Russian pursuit of peace less and less seriously. They're not exactly like the tightest of close allies. You can just look at how, for example, China has taken advantage of the war on Russia's behalf. Russia is selling its energy exports to China to make up for failures in Europe. The fact that Europeans are not buying up the oil, not buying up the crude. Well, the Chinese are buying up Russian crude oil and then refining it in China, and that's why they're buying it at an even cheaper price. But they're buying it at an extremely low discount. Extremely discounted, because Russia doesn't have its European buyers. And so China's taking advantage of it by having an extremely big discount on Russian energy exports. That's them taking advantage of Russia's weak position. So they're not like 100% allies. It's not like communism, like 1950s Stalin and Mao, they're together and they're the united in world domination. They have conflicting interests in many parts of their relationship. So it's not like he's separating an actual alliance here. Like, he's separating two countries that will often work together to try to break up what is often referred to as American hegemony. And so Vivek is saying that he wants to use the Russians to protect our position in Asia and offer them whatever is necessary to do that. So how much would that be? Because I feel like what the Russians would want to not only like end the war, but also completely turn around and say, we're not going to work with the Chinese, we're not going to buy these products, we're going to do whatever's necessary to strangle China and stop them from invading Taiwan, which seems to be one of Vivek Ramaswamy's main focuses. It's kind of crazy to take up the flag for one freedom struggle in Taiwan, but then drop the other one in Ukraine that the Taiwanese are looking to see if America's a reliable ally. But whatever. I just think that he would hear the price tag, and either he or our European allies would absolutely flip out, and he wouldn't know what to do. Not to mention, this is somebody with very little, actually no, this is somebody with zero foreign policy experience. Nixon had Henry Kissinger to engage in reopening, and I don't like Henry Kissinger, but that guy has experience as a statesman. What does this guy have? Who's he going to get? John Mearsheimer? Ultimately, even though it doesn't sound on its face as silly as Trump's 24-hour claim, it doesn't feel that different than when it comes to like how applicable this would actually be, unless he was willing to make the largest of possible concessions to the Russians. Not only when it comes to the Ukrainian territories, the territories in Ukraine, but also when it comes to our general relationship with Europe.
1972. I think Putin is like the new Mao. I will visit Moscow, and I will pull Russia out of its military alliance with China.
It's not a... What is he... What? A military alliance in what way? Okay, if they are in a military alliance, where are the Chinese troops in Ukraine? They work together on certain security issues. Yes. They work together on things like BRICS, but Brazil is also in BRICS, and they're not a military ally of the Russians. The Chinese and the Russians agree when it comes to the United States on one thing, and that is they don't like American hegemony. So, what is your plan to make the Russians say, actually, it's kind of okay, American hegemony, or actually, it should just be us and the Americans that are hegemons? So is it just like an acceptance of like, okay, there's a Russian empire, and then there's the American empire, and that's how the future is going to be? I don't think that this guy is a liberal internationalist or somebody that probably has a ton of respect for international institutions like the UN or international law or the sovereignty of nation states. I think from his commentary from Ukraine, he very much doesn't care about that, the sovereignty of nation states. But I can't wrap my head around the idea that dropping Ukraine as hard as he's advocating for right now would end up helping America in the long run when it comes to having allies. You would think after the Iran deal and after Afghanistan and after the war in Iraq, you wouldn't want to, have another drop the baby scenario.
The Russia-China military alliance is the single greatest military threat that we face today. Hypersonic missile capabilities, nuclear capabilities in Russia, far ahead of us or China. A naval capacity in
nuclear capabilities in Russia far ahead of both us and China. I would like to hear him expand on that. I would like to hear nuclear scientist Vivek Ramaswamy explain to me that. Is it just like the cartel story? You guys remember the cartel story? So Vivek Ramaswamy accused Ukraine of taking our javelins that we sent them and selling them to the cartels in a corruption scheme. And he used like some random internet rag to prove it. And immediately I knew he didn't know what he was talking about, because I looked at the picture and it wasn't even a javelin that the cartel guy was walking around with. It was like a Swedish weapon. A completely separate weapon. It wasn't even a javelin. He didn't even know what a javelin looked like. He just heard that, oh, that's a javelin? Well, it looks like a military thing. I guess it's a javelin. Reposted it, And they never corrected himself, because correcting himself, admitting who was wrong, would kind of remove, I don't know, maybe remove some of the mystique. I just don't think that somebody that is this inexperienced and doesn't know what they're doing and doesn't even really understand the topics that he's talking about that deeply, if I'm being completely honest, if he's saying that shit about the cartels, is going to be able to pull off a Nixon, Henry Kissinger-esque, like, realignment between Russia and China. Also, here's another thing that Vivek Ramaswamy isn't putting into consideration. The relationship between the Soviet Union and China, when we reopened relationship with China, was already incredibly strained. They already had a ton of differences, to the point where the Soviet Union was putting military deployments on the Chinese border. That's what motivated the Chinese to say, actually, maybe it's not a terrible idea to have American spy bases on our border with Russia. Maybe it's not a terrible idea to have to work with the Americans to ship guns to the Mujahideen. I don't know if you guys do that. The Chinese helped us ship guns on the back of Chinese donkeys. Real story, by the way. We couldn't do it on the normal roads and stuff. Had to do it on donkeys. Ship those weapons into Afghanistan to support the Mujahideen. But there's not that rivalry between China, like the communist China and the Soviet Union. That conflict doesn't exist anymore. The Sino-Soviet split is over. They still disagree with issues, but it's no longer called the Sino-Soviet split because those tensions have lowered. So there's no Sino-Soviet split that Nixon and Henry Kissinger could exploit to open up that avenue of reopening. So where's his avenue? Where's his avenue of reopening? Again, I think he listened to like a Mearsheimer lecture on YouTube, and now he's just kind of like, I don't know, he's just kind of like throwing ideas out into the air.
China ahead of ours, combined with an economy that we depend on for our modern way of life, those two nations are in a military alliance with one another, and nobody in either...
I really wish he would clarify what he means by military alliance. They do some military drills together. They have done that.
Political party is talking about it. Worst of all, our engagement in Ukraine is further driving Russia into China's arms. So my foreign policy center...
It's selling them more crude at a heavily discounted price. That's like, economically, they're more reliant on China. That is true. But what? So what would be the what? But outside of, like, they're not militarily, like, there's no like Chinese troops marching into Ukraine. What does he mean? Like, yes, they're selling them more crude, and what of it?
On weakening that alliance. That advances American interests.
But you would let Putin have
that
parts of Ukraine. That is how we
actually secure peace.
But you would let Putin have parts of Ukraine.
I would freeze the current lines. I would freeze the current lines.
He's very good at narrative control, because the host will say something like, "Wait, so you'll just give up all this stuff? Okay, so why, if you give this up, what would stop Putin from just asking for more, like he's done every single other time?" Well, anyway, let's completely avoid that question and talk about how I'm going to be the next Nixon, right? He's just dodging the questions and like shifting the narrative. Like, well, let me not actually answer the question of I'm going to give up Ukraine's land, because that sounds bad and not everyone really hates Ukraine. So what I'll say instead is we're just going to freeze the line of control. Like, okay, well.
Of control, and that would leave parts of the Donbass region with Russia.
No, he's not even telling the full story. Not only would it leave parts of the Donbass, it would leave Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporozhye, and Crimea. 5 regions. 5 regions. That makes up like 18% of the country. Or like, what? It's like 13 to 18% of the country. I forget the exact percentage points. That'd be like, what? Losing like our entire West Coast?
I would also further make a commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. But there are...
NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. Okay, so not only is he going to submit to Russia's demands on Ukraine, he's also not going to provide Ukraine with the mechanisms necessary to defend itself. And I'm pretty sure that if Jim Acosta followed up and asked, okay, if you're not okay with a multilateral, like a large-scale kind of military alliance dissuading a future Russian invasion, what about a bilateral relationship between the United States and Ukraine where we say we will defend them if they're invaded again? I'm pretty sure Vivek Ramaswamy, if pressured by Putin, would immediately cave, because again, he would have no clue how to even begin to figure out how to try to do like another Sino-Soviet split like Electric Boogaloo second time around.
Even greater wins that I will
That
get for the
sounds like
United
a win
States
for
in
Putin.
return. The top of the list. No, our goal should not be for Putin to lose. Our goal should be for America to win. That's what we have forgotten in this country, is that driving Russia into the ground is not a U.S. strategic goal.
So America wins when we abandon our U.S. ally, further decrease our reputation that we are not a dependable ally. We will backstab you within a moment's notice, that between administration to administration, our policy will completely 180. One administration, we're going to completely increase our drone strikes in Afghanistan. Next administration, we're going to completely pull out. Next administration, we're going to commit to Ukraine. Next administration, we're going to fuck you, Ukraine. Like, oh my, yeah, that's really going to help the United States. He hasn't thought this through, man. You know what? He should stick to reporting on the cartels. Okay, that's enough of that. For US to win, then Ukraine has to lose. Let's just dismember Ukraine into a few pieces, give the western part to Poland. He's just a fast talker. He really is just a fast talker. Do you know CIT, Conflict Intelligence Team, from their daily briefs on War 1, hear about counter-artillery proportions and stuff? No, I haven't heard about that. But if you want to link me, you can link it with me at my email, DylanBurnsTV@gmail.com. Or DM it to me on Twitter or Discord if you want me to check out stuff. I check my I don't respond to all my Discord messages because I get a lot. Fast Talker, the Destiny tactic. It's not even Fast Talker, Destiny tactic. It's Fast Talker as in like, just like he's speeding around all the questions and he's saying something fast and confident enough that people are just going to believe him.